My name is Elena. I grew up in a small city outside Charlotte, North Carolina. When people hear that, they imagine front porches, summer storms, and families that sit down together at night. Some of that was true around us, but not in our house. We had a nice place, the bills were paid, and from the street, you'd think I was lucky. Inside, I was mostly alone. My dad worked nonstop. He was in the fire department, climbing ranks, always on call, always exhausted. My mom was a traveling nurse, the kind who'd take jobs out of state for weeks at a time. They weren't bad people in the way you see on the news, but raising a child wasn't their priority. They were busy surviving their own lives, and I was something they assumed would just happen in the background. So I raised myself. I don't say that to sound dramatic. It's literally what happened. I learned how to read by playing video games. There was this old adventure game I was obsessed with, and I wanted to understand every word on the screen, so I taught myself. I figured out cooking the same way. Trial and error, microwave dinners, watching adults on TV because there weren't many adults in my living room. By the time I was 10, I could make myself breakfast, pack my bag, do homework without help, and fall asleep without anyone tucking me in. We had sitters and nannies, but they weren't there to parent me. Most of them came over, got paid, and then disappeared into their phones or the kitchen. One nanny stayed longer than the rest. She was older, loud, and southern in a way that filled the house, always asking where her sweet tea was, always telling my dad what he should do, always trying to pull me out of my room. Looking back, she was the closest thing I had to a real parent. She homeschooled me for years. She's the reason I graduated. She pushed my father to finally let me go to high school when I was old enough. She hadn't fought for me. I think I would have stayed isolated forever. But even with her, I felt this hole. I had everything a kid could want. Toys, birthdays, Christmas presents stacked under the tree. I remember being alone on Christmas morning, opening a giant dollhouse by myself. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I kept thinking something's missing. Not a toy, not a trip, not money, people, connection. A mother's voice, a father's laugh. Anyone who wanted to be there because they loved me, not because they were paid or obligated. Friendships didn't stick. I'd make friends, and then they'd drift away, and I would tell myself it was because I was weird or quiet. But really, it was because I didn't know how to be close to people. I was isolated so long that being alone began to feel like my personality. Even now, I can count my real friends on one hand. I learned early that depending on people was dangerous. As a teenager, that isolation turned into a kind of anger I didn't know what to do with. I was still mostly to myself, but inside I was restless. Okay? My nanny would say, "Go be a kid, have fun." And I'd be like, "Fun with who?" I had done everything in that house, every game, every movie, every chore. I was starved for a life that felt like it belonged to me. There was one place I did feel alive: dance. I started dancing when I was little. Ballet tap, tumbling anything that made my body feel like it could speak when my mouth didn't know how. One of my few good memories is a father-daughter dance recital. My dad actually showed up. He took time off, learned the steps, and we danced together in front of this big crowd. I remember holding his hands and thinking, maybe this is what love feels like. My mom was there for some practices too on the nights he couldn't make it. Those moments were rare, but they mattered. They're like little bright beads in a necklace of darkness. I was doing well in school too. When I finally got into high school, I wanted something serious, something that proved I wasn't destined to be invisible. I went to college to become a surgical assistant. I was almost finished. 4 years into 5. I could see the finish line. And then both of my parents died in the same year. My mom went first early in the year. My dad followed in December. Grief is a weird thing when you didn't feel fully parented in the first place. I was devastated, but part of me was also numb, like I'd been grieving them my whole childhood while they were still alive. What hit me hardest wasn't just losing the Met, was what happened after, because of the state rules at the time. I wasn't considered a full adult yet. I ended up in state custody, sitting there waiting for family to come get me. Nobody came. Not my mom's side, not my dad's side. I remember thinking, so this is it. I'm really alone in the world. Then I heard her voice in the hallway, complaining, demanding sweet tea like she owned the place, and I knew exactly who it was. My nanny. She walked in like a storm, looked at me and said, "Come on, I'm taking you home. I'm adopting you." I was stunned. This woman I'd called a nanny my whole life was the one person who actually chose me. That should have felt like a clean rescue. But it didn't erase everything that came before. It just made the contrast sharper. She loved me the way my parents never knew how to. And if I'm honest, that realization planted the first real darkness in me. Because once you understand what you missed, you start trying to fill the hole any way you can. I didn't know it then. But the next chapter of my life, rebellion, exotic dancing, escorting, drugs was already waiting behind the door. I wish I could say I stayed on that college path and built a normal life. But the truth is, when you grow up hungry for love, you're vulnerable to anything that promises. Then my nanny appeared. Loud, blunt, bossy, just like she'd always been. But she was there. She stormed into the office demanding paperwork, muttering about these fools and her sweet tea. And I remember thinking, how is she the only person who cares about me? How did this happen? She wasn't the typical savior you imagine in moments like that, but she was real, and she chose me when no one else did. She adopted me without hesitation. I went home with her. But I carried a deep fracture with me, and that fracture started to shape everything. I wish I could say I handled the grief in a healthy way. I wish I could say I stayed in school, kept my grades up, and finished that last year of my surgical assistant program. But the truth is, losing both parents when you haven't even fully processed how they failed you is a shock that hits twice. First as a child, then as an adult. My mother had been sick for years. Wheelchair-bound, emotionally distant, physically unable to be the mother I needed. My father had been cheating on her with a nanny, something that was impossible to understand when I was little, but painfully clear when I was old enough to put the pieces together. My mother once told me, if you love your family, you do whatever it takes to keep it together. I didn't understand what she meant until much later, when I realized she meant enduring humiliation, betrayal, loneliness. She thought protecting the marriage was more important than protecting herself, or me. That realization haunted me. How could someone choose silence over self-respect? How could my father take advantage of that silence? And where did that leave me? A part of me began to crack under the weight of all those unanswered questions. I watched their marriage collapse in slow motion long before they died. By the time they were gone, felt like I had already grieved them 100 times. The nanny becoming my legal guardian complicated everything. She had been both the protector and the betrayer good to me, but wrong in her relationship with my father. For a long time, I didn't know how to hold both truths. I just knew I felt safer with her than with anyone else. Safety doesn't always come from purity. Sometimes it comes from familiarity, even if that familiarity is messy and morally confusing. After the adoption, I found myself restless, angry, and searching for anything that made me feel alive. I started rebelling, dressing differently, going out more, hanging around people my nanny disapproved of. I wanted to test boundaries because no one had ever set them. I wanted to feel in control because control had never been mine. The dance studios from my childhood became a bridge to something else. Dancing had always been my escape, my one source of joy, the only place where my body and my feelings moved in unison. By the time I turned 18, that escape turned into curiosity. I had spent years training in ballet, tap, tumbling, even performing at the Big Art Center back in Tennessee. So when I stumbled into the world of exotic dancing, it didn't feel shocking. It felt like a natural extension of my rebellion. People think the transition from childhood dancer to adult entertainer is sudden. For me, it was a slow slide. I was already angry, already lonely, already searching for a sense of belonging. The girls at the club asked me if I had ever smoked, partied, hooked up, tried anything wild. I hadn't. I was the weird, sheltered girl who knew anatomy textbooks better than social cues. They encouraged me to try things weed, late nights pushing limits, and I did. Because for the first time in my life, someone was paying attention to me. The club wasn't glamorous. It wasn't freeing. But it was a place where people saw me. They learned my name. They touched my arm. They asked questions. They made me feel, however falsely, like I mattered. And when you grow up starving for affection, even cheap attention feels like a feast. What started as dancing quickly turned into escorting. I didn't plan it. Just happened the way bad choices often happen, slowly, with 1,000 small justifications. I told myself I was just talking to people, just keeping them company, just listening. And sometimes that was true. I really did become a therapist of sorts for lonely men. But sometimes things went further. And every time they did, I felt myself slipping deeper into a version of life I didn't recognize but couldn't walk away from. The real downward spiral happened after I moved to Long Beach. I got attacked in an alley. Someone hit me hard enough to damage my leg permanently. I was put on pain meds, and my boyfriend at the time stole every pill. I didn't even know what withdrawal was until that moment. I thought I was dying. His brother had to help me because he was terrified of what he had done. I trusted him, and he slammed me into a wall. That was the moment my brain said, "You're in danger." Wake up, but waking up didn't save me. It led me straight into heroin. After that came methadone, then crystal, then fentanyl. Drugs became the bridge between my past and my present between. The girl who needed love and the woman who didn't know how to live without numbness. By the time I ended up living in Los Angeles, mostly on the streets, I had become the person everyone warned their kids about: the girl who looks older than her age, who carries trauma in her voice, who sleeps in motels when she can afford it, who trusts the wrong people because she never learned how to trust the right ones. People look at me now and think my story started with addiction or escorting. But the truth is, it started in a house full of toys and empty rooms. It started with a child who had everything except the thing she needed most. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to become an escort, or an addict, or a girl who lived out of motels and backpacks. It didn't happen in one choice. It happened in hundreds of tiny one-sliding doors, wrong turns, moments when I needed comfort more than I needed safety. And because I had never learned what healthy comfort looked like, I grabbed whatever was in front of me. Dancing was the first door, before the drugs. Before the chaos, before the streets, there was dance. Real dance. Ballet shoes tied too tightly. Tap shoes clicking on worn wooden floors. My body moving in ways my mind didn't know how to express. It was the only language I felt fluent in. And when everything in my life started unraveling, my parents dying, the truth about their marriage, the adoption, the grief dance felt like the only part of me that still worked. So when the girls at the club asked if I'd ever tried exotic dancing, I didn't think of it as crossing a line. I thought of it as another stage, another costume, another character I could slip into, so I didn't have to be myself for a while. Walking into that first strip club was like stepping into a different universe. Loud music, neon lights bouncing, off-metal poles, the smell of perfume, sweat, and alcohol mixing into the kind of atmosphere that numbs your senses before you even touch a drink. It should have scared me, but it didn't. It felt familiar in a twisted way, bright on the outside, hollow on the inside. Just like my childhood. The girls were friendly, wild, confident. Shame, when you've spent your entire life trying to fill a hole inside you. That kind of numbness feels like a miracle. And then my boyfriend at the time stole all my medication and sold it. I didn't know what withdrawal was until it hit me. I thought I was dying. I was shaking, vomiting, crying, begging for help. I didn't even understand what my body was doing. That level of desperation makes you feel like a cornered animal. His brother had to intervene because he was too scared to deal with what he caused. And when I trusted him to help me, he slammed me. Hard enough for my brain to finally wake up and scream, "You're in danger. You're in danger. You're in danger." But waking up didn't mean getting better. It meant finding heroin. Heroin didn't ask. Questions. Heroin didn't abandon me. Heroin didn't judge me for wanting to feel nothing. It wrapped me in the warmest, deadliest kind of silence. What followed was a carousel of substitutes: methadone, which made me sicker; crystal, which made me restless; fentanyl, which made me disappear piece by piece. Addiction doesn't just take your future, it rewrites your past. Suddenly, all the good memories get overshadowed by all the places where love should have been. But WASN single quotes too, people think addiction is about the drug. It isn't that, it's about the reasons you need the drug. And my reasons were carved into me long before I ever touched a substance. By the time I ended up in Los Angeles, mostly unhoused, bouncing between Airbnb rooms and sidewalks, I didn't recognize myself. I wasn't the girl who danced ballet in Tennessee. I wasn't the girl who read textbooks. I wasn't even the girl who lost her parents. I had become someone new, someone shaped by a lifetime of neglect, a broken family, trauma, escape, survival, and the desperate hope that there was still a version of me worth saving. I didn't know it then, but the darkest chapters were still ahead, and somehow, so were the lessons. By the time I reached Los Angeles, I was carrying more than just a backpack. I was carrying years of grief, betrayal, addiction, and a version of myself I didn't know how to escape. People think homelessness is only about losing a house. It's not. It's about losing the sense that you belong anywhere at all. I wasn't always on the street. Some nights I've scraped enough money from escorting to get an Airbnb, a room for a night, a bed I didn't have to share with fear, a door I could lock. But most nights it was sidewalks, alleys, parks, hidden corners. You learn quickly how to blend into shadows, how to walk fast, how to hide your panic when sirens pass, how to stay awake just long enough so nothing happens to you. But even in the worst moments, I kept thinking, how did I get here? Was this always my path? People don't understand how many small betrayals it takes to destroy someone, how many times you have to be hurt before you stop fighting. My addiction wasn't just about drugs. It was about the pain behind them. The pain of parents who should have loved me but didn't know how. The pain of being raised by a nanny who filled some of the gaps while creating others. The pain of being told I was loved only when someone needed something from me. The pain of being young and female and alone in a world that feeds on the unprotected. That's why fentanyl was so dangerous for me. It didn't just numb the pain. It erased me. For a few minutes, I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like the girl who graduated college only to lose everything. I didn't feel like the girl who dreamed of being a surgical assistant. I just felt nothing. And nothing felt better than everything I had been through. But the thing about nothingness is that it comes with a bill. And the bill is always due. Living with addiction is like living beside a beast. Sometimes it sleeps. Sometimes it screams. People ask why women like me end up in escorting. The better question is, what choices are left when every structure that's supposed to protect you collapses? I escorted because I needed to survive. I escorted because no one was coming to save me. I escorted because I was still trying to fix the mess my parents left behind. Writing became another way to survive. Words were the one thing I still had power over. When I wrote, I could shape a future that wasn't as chaotic as my present. I could imagine a version of myself that wasn't drowning. But the reality was that I wrote during the day and escorted at night. I lived between two worlds, one where I tried to rebuild myself and another where I destroyed myself a little more each time. People think addiction and sex work are the whole story, but really, they're symptoms. The real story is a girl who kept trying to be loved and kept being punished for it. What people don't see is the strength behind all of it. Because despite the drugs, despite the homelessness, despite the legal problems, despite the violence, I never stopped dreaming. I never stopped imagining a version of me who could get clean, finish school, have a home, have a child, have the life I once watched from the outside. I wasn't self-destructive because I wanted to die. I was self-destructive because I didn't know how to live. And yet, somewhere inside the chaos, something kept whispering, Don't give up. Not yet. I didn't know it then. But that whisper would become the beginning of change. Because the darkest part of a story is always right before the moment something shifts. There comes a point in every survivor's life where you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What do I do next?" I didn't get to that point overnight. I didn't wake up one day magically healed or brave. It took years of breaking, years of using, years of losing myself piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. And even then, the hardest part wasn't surviving the streets. It was learning how to live when I wasn't on them. People don't understand how exhausting it is just to exist when you're unhoused. Every day is a negotiation with danger, where to sleep, where to hide your belongings, who you can trust. Every sound at night becomes a threat. Every stranger becomes a risk. And the worst part isn't the cold or the hunger. It's the shame. The shame of sitting on a curb counting change. The shame of avoiding your reflection in windows because you don't want to see how far you've fallen. The shame of knowing people see you as a problem, not a person. I used to sit on the sidewalk at 2 a.m. eating cheap noodles out of a cup, watching cars pass by, imagining the people inside them going home to warm beds and quiet rooms. I would think, what would it feel like to have a life that simple? A life where safety wasn't something you had to earn every minute? That longing hurt more than any withdrawal. The turning point for me wasn't dramatic. There was no movie moment, no rescue, no big revelation. It was a quiet night outside a convenience store, cold, empty, forgettable, when I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Not the drugs, not the escorting, not the running, not the lies I told myself. My hands were shaking, my stomach hurt, my eyes burned from crying. A little girl walked past holding her mother's hand, and I felt myself crumble inside. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to be loved like her. I wanted to love myself the way no one had loved me. That's when something shifted. Not healed, just shifted. I went back to a clinic I had avoided 100 times. I told them everything. They didn't judge me. They didn't look at me like I was trash. They looked at me like a patient, like a human being who needed help. It was the first time in years I felt seen without being used. Recovery wasn't clean or pretty. I relapsed more than once. There were days I felt strong and others where I felt like I was dragging my body through wet cement. But every time I fell, I got back up a little faster. I don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting the same demons, repeating the same patterns, surviving instead of living. I want something different, something whole, something mine. People see me and think I'm self-destructive. And yes, mentally, I can be. Trauma rewires your brain. It teaches you to expect the worst so you can survive it. But physically, I don't want to die. I never did. Every overdose I avoided, every dangerous encounter I escaped. Every night I slept with one I opened, those were proof of how much I wanted to stay alive, even when I didn't know how to live. My biggest strength isn't my body or my beauty or the things men wanted from me. It's my mind, my education, my ability to learn, to read, to teach myself new ways of being. That's what kept me from disappearing completely. That's my weapon. If I ever do get out of this cycle fully, and I believe I can, it will be because I didn't let go of the part of me that still wanted more. The part that still wants to finish school. The part that wants to help kids who grew up like me. The part that wants to be the mother I never had. The most important lesson I've learned is simple. You have to love yourself first. Not in a pretty Instagram quote way, not in a survival way. In a no one is coming to save you. So you have to save yourself way. Because when you give everything to others and leave nothing for yourself, you end up empty, just like I did. And climbing out of emptiness is harder than anything I've ever faced. But I'm climbing slowly, quietly, one choice at a time. I don't know how my